Quality risk management is the most important element of pharmaceutical product development. Properly done, it ensures gaining the right knowledge leading to an excellent product and process performance. This article discusses a practical method for assessing severity. Severity is a measure of parameters' impact on critical quality attributes, CQA's. It is directly related to the strength of the relationship with the CQA's. This step of the risk management process is not the stage where critical parameters are identified. That determination comes later. It is too early in the risk assessment process to get sidetracked by those discussions. Keep the eye on the goal of this step. Identify variability with possible impact on the CQA's and determine the magnitude of the impact. In my previous video, Quality Risk Assessment, How to Assess Risk with Limited Batch Data, I discussed knowledge assessment of the input parameter X to the output CQA'Y relationship. This video builds on the previous. Be sure to watch it if you've not done so. The magnitude of the parameter impact is influenced by the strength of the XY relationship and also the possibility of downstream mitigation. If X has no impact on Y, the severity is 1. The severity is low when large changes in X result in little variation in Y. Severity is low if the impact is localized to a given step. Low severity parameters may impact the CQA, but the impact is very weak and can often be neglected. Can the impact of a parameter be further mitigated by subsequent action? Medium severity parameters may have a significant impact on the CQA's, but the impact can be mitigated downstream. The downstream mitigation should not be by chance. If removal of moisture is important, then mitigation is not a blind chance that moisture may be lower downstream. The mitigation should directly bring moisture to the required level. The severity is high when small changes in X result in large variation in Y. High severity parameters influence the CQA's in a way that cannot be mitigated downstream and where the parameter will directly cause the CQA to fail. In drug substance risk assessments, the early synthesis steps exert their influence on the API CQA's through the impurity profile. Most impurities, especially early in the synthesis, are removed downstream. As such, the severity of the impact of parameters leading to the formulation of those impurities is quite low. Often, the variability in those parameters can be neglected with respect to the API impurity profile. However, there are those instances in many syntheses where an impurity once formed will not be removed. I recall an instance where the endpoint of hydrogenation was very critical. Under hydrogenation, stopping the reaction too soon would lead to excess unreacted material and lower the yield. Too much hydrogenation, letting the reaction go too long, resulted in an impurity that could not be removed. In that instance, determining the endpoint was essential. Moreover, ensuring the reaction rate did not proceed too quickly so as to allow enough time to determine the endpoint was also essential. In this instance, the parameters had the highest severity. Loss of control of these parameters would directly lead to the failure of the API. I would be remiss at this point if I didn't caution against a common misunderstanding of risk assessment. People will often muddle risk assessments by confusing or combining severity with probability or detectability. In the previous example, the IPC and control are needed precisely because the severity is high. Some will leap to the conclusion the process was made robust and thus severity is low. Robustness is associated with probability rather than severity. The fact the parameter has a direct and lasting impact on the CQA is the important output of severity. The essential outcome of risk assessments is to identify those parameters with potential to directly influence the CQA. The balance of the development process is to ensure the product and process are robust to such variation, detected, and controlled. The key difference between the severity of 3 and 4 is the ability to mitigate the effect downstream. Those parameters influencing the CQA with no downstream mitigation are given the highest severity. The process step in question where the variation occurs should be flagged high in the risk assessment. If a parameter can impact the CQA yet be mitigated downstream, lessens the severity of the given step. The important distinction between the severity of 2 and severity of 3 is the ability of the parameter to cause the CQA to come close to the specification limit. Parameters with the severity of 2 constitute those in which variation on the CQA is possible, but the CQA varies little with variation of the parameter. Let's do a mini exercise. You are facilitating the baseline risk assessment prior to a registration campaign. You are measuring the initial parameter risks. The team wants to prioritize final experiments prior to registration batch manufacture. You are asked to assess the severity of the drying step following a wet high shear granulation of a solid dosage immediate release tablet. Too much moisture remaining in the granules has a direct negative impact on content uniformity. This is the last process step where moisture is controlled. The fluid bed dryer has an airflow parameter. If the airflow is too low, the granules are not exposed to enough air in circulation to dry, and moisture can be high in the granules. Too much air in the fine granules can be blown out of the top of the dryer. The SME knows the severity of impact from the experience of dozens of similar products, but has not conducted specific experiments on this formulation. What information do you want in order to make a severity determination? How would you rate the severity? First, we cannot discount the experience of the SME. Since the knowledge is based on expert opinion, it is correlative in nature. That is acceptable in development since there is still time to run further experiments before validation, which is months away. However, that does not answer the severity question. From the information given, we can rule out the severity of 1. Clearly, the parameter has an impact on the CQA, and moreover, the impact is not slight. The high impact on the CQA rules out 2 as well. That leaves a severity of 3 or 4. You ask the SME about other factors that influence the drying. Inlet air temperature, outlet air temperature, and drying time all impact the endpoint. Hence, multiple factors are in play. We know from the information provided there is no downstream mitigation designed into the process. We do not have enough information to definitively distinguish airflow from the others suspected to influence moisture. We know if the moisture is out of range at the end of this step, it will be out of range at the compression of the tablet. The prudent measure is to mark it with a severity of 4. Later articles will show how high severity rating will flag the parameter for further study. I cannot emphasize enough the goal of this step in the process is to identify variability that can impact the CQA. The first passes of the risk assessment in development will be imprecise. It is advantageous to err on the side of caution when data is still being collected. However, one should not lose the opportunity to document knowledge which clearly defines the severity. Removing the noise from further consideration is the great advantage of risk assessments. The next articles will discuss combining severity with the other risk assessment elements. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you do not miss an episode.